Awen.
Awen.
What was the process of building the mental resilience course?
What was the process? Jeepers. Years of practice. I'd say years of practice. Practicing the tools myself to, I suppose, practicing myself to see what came about for me. And then, understanding what they give to me, and then having spoken to people since setting Odyssey up and before that, people coming to see me, what they're suffering with, how they're presenting, realizing that, 9 times out of 10, these practices will improve your life. And then put the coaching program together to sort of keep some accountability. Because I've been giving out the advice of, the breathwork, the cold water stuff, coupled with mindset and understanding our minds. And people would come and see me once a week or once a month, just at the classes I put on, keep presenting with the same things, feeling great relief after, and then going away, not doing it until the next time they see me. And then a case of reset. So it's like, well, if I can get them people to implement it into their own life in a 6-week period where they're being held accountable, where it's like an intensive course of, understanding how to physically do the practices, then seeing what benefits they get from it, both mentally, physically, and sort of spiritually, if you want, you know what I mean? So they do something every day to allow themselves to build trust and confidence that the thing that they're doing is having benefit in their lives, rather than doing it once every now and again and feeling that benefit. If they implement it every day for a period of time where I'm keeping them accountable to it, then they're more likely to do it. They're more likely to feel the benefits and feel how they can fit that in with their lifestyle. I think it's a lifestyle change. It's not something you can pop up and do every now and again. It is. But if you want the true benefit of it, if you do it regularly, and often, you're gonna get a lot of benefit from it, and it's gonna keep you emotionally regulated and mentally well. And if life starts getting hard, these are the tools you can turn to sort of get through them difficult times and come out the other side feeling better from.
Just give a quick rundown of what the resilience course consists of for people that aren't aware.
Yeah, so the program is basically a 6-week program that I've put together, and it starts with teaching breathwork, understanding what that does for us in our everyday lives. You know what I mean? We can, coupled with understanding about the mind as well, how the mind's operating, what state we might be living in, whether that's your fight or flight state and your rest and digest, how the breathwork sort of couples the two together, and how we can manipulate that system in order to feel calmer, coupled with the cold water as well. I educate people on what's happening in the body, what's happening in the mind when they're getting into the cold water, and the health benefits they're getting from it. So, I find that giving people who don't know the information on the tools that they're using so they can self-realize what it is they're up against, and with the information they've got about the practices I'm teaching, how they can implement it into their lives. Because, it's only that person who knows what they're truly up against and what they're truly feeling. So, but I also give them the opportunity to mark themselves or score themselves. So, through that 6-week program, they'll score themselves from a number of different demographics. So they'll score themselves on, out of 10, anxiety, fear, worry, dread, sort of negative emotions. And they'll also score themselves on positive emotions, which are, happiness, well-being, motivation, drive, positive self-talk, and all positive emotion. So we track that data over 6 weeks. It's self-scored. And by the time we come to the end of the 6-week course, if someone's presented with a 10 out of 10 anxiety when they come on the course, we want to see that drop down to below 5. We want to see them. We want to see the graph come from a 10 to, to lower numbers in all the negative emotions, and we want to see all the positive emotions that might be low, like positive self-talk. Someone who's got fear, anxiety, worrying, and the negative emotions are all high. Generally, they'll also score themselves low on the positive ones, like drive, motivation, positive self-talk, stuff like that. So at the end of the 6-week period, we want to see, on the graphs, we create a graph then from the data we collect. So we want to see the graphs go up on the positive, the graphs come down on the negative. And that does two things. It's the people coming along are self-scoring themselves. So it's their own feeling along the way, how, checking in with themselves. But at the end of it, they can see progress. Or there's talking points. Do you know what I mean? There's we've found that some people, it's more or less a straight line up and down in the direction that we've, predicted it would do. But then there's other people had ups and downs through that 6-week period. And then we can look at if you've had a spike in negative emotion in week 2 with the digging deep every week and the daily check-ins of, how you're feeling, what you're up to, what were your wins this week, what were you, where did you lose? You can look back on week 2 and go, look at that incident that caused, you were doing really well, maybe week, whatever week it is, but you were doing really well. And then X happened. All your negative emotion spiked, all your positive emotion that you built had started to come down, and you can start to educate the person on how an incident can affect them, but then how these tools that they're learning to use can realign them, showing them that when life throws a shit butty your way, do you know what I mean? It doesn't have to flatten you. It's going to affect you, but it doesn't have to knock you down for weeks. It's literally a week, you're back to your practice, and we've literally seen, spikes, let's say week 3 spikes, and it's because of an incident. It might be an incident at work, family, whatever. Life's not an exact science. So incidents come along in life and we'll see a spike, but then they've got back down to it and they've carried on, and, the negative emotion has stayed low. So it just highlights that, over a period of, a short window of time, 6 weeks in a full life, and it's a really short window of time, but it just highlights the fact that, stuff can happen and it will happen. And this is not a magic potion where you do this all the time and you walk through, life running through flowery fields and everything's great. Stuff happens. Life can get hard sometimes. This is when you dig in. This is where you really turn to these tools that are going to realign your emotion. So you're not in a reactive state, you're more in a proactive state to keep yourself balanced. And it's about that balance. That's what we're sort of seeing in the figures at the minute.
Mm. And what's the significance with 6 weeks? So is that like a set time which you've consciously put out there to create these daily habits for people? What do they then do after the 6-week program?
Yeah, well, I put it. I was going to do a month at first. I was going to do 4 weeks, but I thought, well, by the time they got into it, 4 weeks is not enough. And I think, I'm asking the clients to do these practices every day, daily. Which you know yourself, to do breathwork, cool water every day. It's quite a big commitment, especially to someone who's relatively new to it as well. So then looking at 2 months might be too long. So I just put it at 6 weeks. It's nothing more than it's not 2 months, it's not a month, it's a bit more. It takes you a couple of weeks to get into it, and you've got a good month of data. I think it's a long enough period of time to keep someone interested, but not too long where it becomes monotonous and it's like never ending. Because I think the reality really is you're not, doing these practices are something that you keep a maintenance dose of. And then when, the way I use them is I keep a maintenance dose of these. I'll do cold water a couple of times a week along with breathwork, along with the other stuff that I'm doing. I'm not doing it every day. And I think that's the way to incorporate it into your life. If it's the same with anything. If you're doing something religiously every day, it probably will get monotonous. If you go into the gym every day, whatever you're doing every single day, it can get monotonous. And I think being realistic about where we're at is by going, do a 6-week period intense, show yourself that you can do that. You can be, regimented. You can get stuff done in a 6-week period. It's not an infinite amount of time. And then after that, then see how it fits for you. You've just learned something for that period of time. See how it fits in with you for a little bit. And, you know, it might be 3 times a week. You might want to carry on doing it every day. You know what I mean? I mean, I did this practice, you know, breathwork. I was doing a breathwork a long time before I did the cold water. But I was doing breathwork daily, you know, or a good 6 days out of the 7 days a week for about 18 months, 2 years. And then once I started doing the cold water as well, that became, you know, that were at least 5 times a week. But what you find is people come along every once in a while, and they might come and do, you know, the breath and cold water that I do, and you know, they might not have done it for 2 or 3 months, so they have this big spike of, you know, dopamine and release of serotonin. They have these big, you know, experiences during the breath work because they're not doing it often, and then they go away. But during the 6-week period, it's not about having, for want of a better phrase, like the hedonism part of it, you know, like the real big moments. I think over a 6-week period, it's a tool that's working alongside. It's like a microdose. It's every day, little and often, keeping that balance to the point where you can get into a mode where if life gets hard or you start to feel negative emotion again, that's the first place you turn to. Like, well, let's reset. Let's know what this stuff does for us, then start build again. I think that's. But to answer the question, the 6 weeks was nothing more than, I think it's not too short of a time where it's like, I can do this easily, but it's not too long of a time where it's overwhelming, you know, for people. Because, you know, I sort of want to put this across for everybody, you know, people who've never done anything like this before. Do you know what I mean? Because for a lot of people, they think it's like out there, hippie, and it's all happy clapping. You know, it's wherever you're at the time, and there's nothing wrong with anything. But, you know, for a lot of people, even just coming doing breath work is like way out there. So it's like, you know, don't overwhelm the people.
And for those people who potentially could be listening to exactly this, you know, they've probably, some of them might not have heard what breathwork is, or, you know, what are the benefits of cold water and all these things that you're implementing in this 6-week course of yours. So for those who have never heard of it or don't understand it, what would your introduction be to exactly what it is and why you do it?
What the benefits and stuff. Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I say this a lot. You know, there's been a lot of people come along to the breathwork classes, and the common theme, you know what I mean, when you start to ask questions, there's people who suffer, you know, on a multitude of different levels. And I say this a lot, you know, human beings, there's 3 main pillars to a human being, and it's mind, body, and soul or spirit. And breathwork will interact with you on either one of them levels or all 3. You know, but it's a simple practice. It's basically doing a certain way of breathing in a controlled environment, and it does hit you on all them levels. So on a body level, it sort of, you know, it puts us into a healing state. It puts, you know, it alkalizes our blood. It changes our blood chemistry. So it basically puts us into a healing state. You know, it increases our oxygen capacity. It puts us into a temporary state of hypoxia, so it increases our oxygen carrying capacity. And with it putting us into an alkaline state, you know, anything nasty that resides inside of us generally thrives off an acidic state. So anything nasty like cancer and stuff generally thrives in an acidic environment. So if we can change our internal environment to more of a alkaline state, it doesn't, you know, it's less likely for anything nasty to pop up or thrive if we continuously put it into the opposite state. So, you know, it does that sort of thing. So that's body, really. From a mind point of view, it shines a spotlight on that internal narrative within. I like to shine the spotlight on that because there's a lot of people out there, and I was included in this, like, straight, you know, one of the things that was a massive revelation for me in my sort of journey was the revelation that I am not my mind. I am not the thinker. Do you know what I mean? A lot of people identify with their mind. So that internal dialogue, that internal chatter, that everybody has, a lot of people think that that's their being and that's who they are. But I like to put it across where that chatter that's inside, which for a lot of people is generally negative and unhelpful, we can start to highlight that by switching it off. And I think breathwork brings about mass relief from that internal dialogue. And I always highlight to people who come along that if we can switch that part of ourselves off, that internal dialogue that you may have identified with forever, if we can stop that thinking, stop that internal dialogue coming in, even for just a split second, even for 10 seconds, then that brings about a shift in perspective that you go, well, hang on a minute. If I always thought I were my mind and everything that came into my mind I had to identify with and attach emotion to, which if it's negative chatter, we're attaching emotion to negativity, which can cause us unease inside. If I can switch that off, or that person can switch that off, it brings about a shift in perspective of like, well, if you always thought that were you, but then you could stop thinking, well, who are you when you're not thinking? And that's a great question. But it's a perspective shift that a lot of people need. And it's a perspective shift I had when I realized, hang on a minute, I can stop that. Like, why has nobody ever told me that we can stop this chatter inside? Do you know what I mean? So I like to highlight the switching off the mind and then bringing thoughts back in. Become the observer of your thoughts rather than become the, attaching all your emotion to your thought. Because if you're having negative thought, it's going to generate negative emotion. So on a mind perspective, shining the spotlight on that internal narrative is key to understanding, how to bring about peace. That's the mind level, but then also understanding, I also try to bring an understanding about that internal dialogue is heavily linked with your fight or flight response. So how, your fight or flight response is basically designed to keep us alive as human beings. So, the mechanism, highlighting that mechanism to people that's within us, that's there to keep us alive, but can cause us havoc as well. But once we know, we can switch, very crudely, we can switch into two states. We've either got our fight or flight response or our rest and digest. What happens in our responsive state, like some people call it the chimp brain, some people call it the fight or flight, that mechanism that's there to keep us alive. So if we see, as cavemen and women walking around, if we see a pack of wolves in the woods, we see that threat. We get that perception come into our senses. We filter that information down into our internal world. And then emotion will start to happen. So if we see a pack of wolves, our internals start to go, generate these emotions. So we feel that and become aware of this emotion. We don't like being in this environment. We move away until this emotion subsides. Yeah. So in that moment, we see the threat. And then a certain set of sequences start to arise within us. And the way I always put it across, and the easiest way I've found to put it across, is if you imagine that your head is like a periscope and anything below your chin is the submarine. Yeah, so the periscope's above the water and everything below our neck is the submarine. So all our cells and our enzymes and everything in here that's generally causing feelings, are the people on the submarine, and we've got the periscope. Now we're in charge of the periscope, but we're not in charge. I've never met anyone yet who's in charge of their enzymes or can control, the blood vessels or whatever. Do you know what I mean? So that's your autonomic nervous system. That's just happening below you. So the periscope of perception picks up a threat. It feeds in. The people down on the submarine pick up that threat. Someone pushes a red button. The shit hits the fan on the submarine. It's panic stations. Yeah. But what happens then is our heart rate picks up. Yeah. Our breathing will either shallow or stop. And, we start to it starts to pump these negative emotions, negative feelings out. Yeah. But also there's other stuff happening. So we're shutting things down that we don't need. Because if we see a pack of wolves, we don't need our immune system. We don't need our urinary tract to be open. We don't need our bowel to be open. Do you know what I mean? It changes the flow of blood from the thinking, cognitive, sort of common sense part of our brain away from that, into our muscles, because all it wants us to do is run. So we run away from the threat. We get out of there. We're away from the threat now. And then the reverse happens then. So what happens is, as we calm down, our breathing naturally slows, which in turn slows our heart rate. And then the people on the submarine then go, hang on a minute, his breathing's slowing, his heart rate's slowing, the threat's over. And then normal service starts to be resumed on the submarine. Do you know what I mean? Everything opens back up. Your immune system opens back up. Urinary tract, bowel. Then the blood starts to go to more that cognitive side. Your fine motor skills and your concentration and your thinking comes back because the blood's back in that part of your brain that allows that. And that's your rest and digest state. So if you think about that mechanism, you're walking through the woods, you see the threat, you see the pack of wolves, all that happens in a split second. So I don't know if anyone's ever had a near miss in a car, or imagine you're walking along the top of a wall and you slip and you go, oh shit, and there's a flare up your center of like, oh, that were close. That's how fast that thing comes in. So it's not like a delayed reaction. It's in. And before you can even think about what's going on, that stuff's in. You move away from the threat. It gets you away from the threat. You calm back down. You go into rest and digest. It's the same with all animals. It's the same with the gazelle on the savannah, minding its own business, eating the grass. The lion turns up, it runs away. That system kicks in, instinct, gone. Calms back down, normal service is resumed. But that's all well and good. But in the society in which we live in now, them stressors aren't the wolf in the woods. The stressors that are coming into us through our periscope of perception and feeding down to the submarine are the bills at the end of the month, work, family, life. Do you know what I mean? Negative media, social media, negative self-talk. We can talk ourselves into a bloody frenzy, because this submarine doesn't know whether we're perceiving the wolves or we're worrying about we might see wolves. It's the same thing. It doesn't know inside. All we're doing is feeding stuff down. So when we become aware of that process, we go, right, yeah, so there's this fight or flight mode where we're in a reactive state, and then there's a rest and digest where we're in a calm state. Brilliant. It's like, well, and how do we get from one to the other? And that's the sort of stuff I'm trying to highlight. It's like, this is the mechanism. It's never going away. It's inbuilt in us. It's our instincts. It's our humanity. But if we know how to manipulate that, if we know how that system works, that's a good thing. There's two modes. The next one is, well, how do we get from one to the other? Well, if you consider that if you're breathing shallows or, goes shallow, short, shallow breaths or stops, and your heart rate picks up when we're in the fight or flight response, the opposite is true when we're trying to get into rest and digest. So by slowing our breathing down, that then slows our heart rate down. And we can, even if we're feeling negative emotion, we can start to feel that rise and go, right, I'm in a reactive state. If I bring attention and focus to my breath, change the way I'm breathing, I can manipulate that system that I know is part of it and get back into that rest and digest state. And then that becomes the learning, that becomes a highlight that, give that information across. So they understand the mechanisms, but really, whether you understand all that or not, if you slow your breathing down, it's going to slow your heart rate down. It's going to reduce that negative emotion. Do you know what I mean? So depending on how you're breathing, it can depend on what state you might be in. And then it's about picking up on that. There's loads of symptoms for it. It's like people who are stressed can't think. I just can't think. My head's full. My head's full. I can't think. I've got a mental block. It's foggy head. But if they're in a reactive state, where's that blood that's meant to be in the thinking part of the brain? It's not there. It's somewhere. It's in your muscles getting ready to run. Do you know what I mean? It's present in people when they have road rage. It's you see it all the time. People in a constant reactive state, constantly getting sick. You know, they're constantly ill. Anytime, you know, I used to go for a period of time, you know, running my own business, not looking after myself, not aware of any of this stuff. And you know, someone could bloody sneeze 3 streets away and I'd catch a cold, you know what I mean? And I'd be ill for weeks, and you know, because my immune system were on the floor. I was constantly in a reactive state. So I had no immune system. My body weren't functioning. If you go prolonged periods of time where your bowels aren't opening up, right, or your urinary tract's not opening up, right, you know, you're not in that clear thinking part of your brain. You're more reactive. You know, you're harder to be around. And it's just having that perspective of, well, one from the other. Do you know what I mean? And then again, bringing that, you know, so I like to bring people in, give them that highlight of, you know, this is the mechanism, this is how you can use it in your own life. It's great that you've come to me and doing a breathwork session with me and a sound and, you know, that sort of thing. But here's the tool. Here's the thing that's going to help you in life if you get stuck. And then coupled with the cold water, then, you know, we come out of the breathwork, we start to speak about the ice bath, you know. And I'm like, what story were you telling yourself on the way here if you've never done an ice bath, you know? And the amount of people go, I could do the breathwork, but I'd never do the ice. And straight away, that story they tell themselves. So again, that highlights, we switch that mechanism off during the breathwork. We go through that process, then we come back out of that, we start talking about the cold water. Again, education's given. What's happening when you're getting in that cold water? You know, rather than just jump in and go, just get in there and you'll manage. It's like, understand what's going on. Understand what's going on the body. Do you know what I mean? Understand that it's safe to do if done right with this good understanding. So, you know, we talk about how the blood vessels are closing, how the warm blood's protecting our core. We talk about all the feel-good hormones that are being kicked off in that. But the main one, again, is shine the spotlight straight away on that internal narrative. You know, we come out the breathwork, everyone's nice and peaceful and chill. We start talking about the cold water, and I go, well, what are you telling yourself now about getting that cold water? And they're like, oh, negative story. And it's great because you get them to the edge of the bath. And again, I'm at, what are you telling yourself now about getting in there? That fight or flight system, you know, I call it the chimp brain. It's the best way of thinking about it. You've got this chimp that lives inside of you that will rule you if it can. Do you know what I mean? What's your chimp saying to you? What's your internal dialogue saying to you now? You know, is it telling you anything good or empowering or positive right now before you get in an ice bath? I don't think I've ever met anyone yet who said yeah to that. And me included, you know, I've done this loads of times. You guys have done it as well. And like, when you're getting in there, even when you've been in the coldest ice bath ever, and you might get in there in like April and there's no ice on it, and you know the water's at like 8 degrees, but you're still procrastinating, going, fuck, getting in there. So there's no good chat. And that's the part that you've got to go, okay, but I'm doing it anyway. And that's the part that you push past. That's the edge of your comfort zone. And when you step in that water, you've stepped out of it. And again, the procedure for getting through that process, all your job is to do is to control your breathing. Unless you know how to close the veins in your hands, unless you know how to direct the blood to your core, all your job is up here in the periscope, is to breathe slowly. You get through the process and then you come out the other side and you're empowered. And then I highlight that narrative again. What are you telling yourself now? Oh, it's not as hard as I thought it was going to be. Exactly. And within a short period of time, we've shone the spotlight on, you know, the benefits of the breath. We've shone the spotlight on, you know, the mechanisms that live within inside of us human beings. We've shone the spotlight on the internal narrative of the monkey brain. We've shone the spotlight on that again before getting in the cold water. We've proved to you then that you can do uncomfortable, difficult stuff. You can sit within an uncomfortable, difficult situation for a period of time, push past that part of yourself that, you know, will hold you back. It's the same mechanism that has you snoozing the alarm clock in the morning. It's the same mechanism that will have you snacking on biscuits when you're trying to be good. It's the same mechanism that will bring about a lot of your vices. You know, I won't go to the gym this morning, I'll pass up on that. That's the same mechanism that's screaming at you, don't get in that ice bath. But when you get in there and you prove to yourself that chatter in my head, although often it comes along and it talks shite to me, and it's not always helpful, it doesn't define me as who I am. And then you get in there anyway, you come out the other side feeling great about it. And within a short window of time, you know, people have had a big perspective shift and they feel great, because you can't not do, because then you just body's flooded with feel good hormones. So, you know, so that's sort of a process and a perspective shift that I've found gets brought about when I try and deliver it the way I deliver it. So people aren't just coming for a one-off experience, they're learning all about it. And yeah, they might come quite often, but I feel like you've always, you know, if you can have a tool that you can use when stuff gets hard, and you've already proved to yourself you can do difficult stuff, you know, whatever you do in that ice bath to get through that difficult moment, it'll apply to other areas of your life.
I had the privilege of trialing the course, the 6 weeks, and I was just trying to find it then. I remember a day I checked in, and the narrative prior was, I don't think I can complete this. I think it was in the first week.
Yeah, I don't think I complete this course.
Do you remember what I said when I got out? Can take on the world.
Yeah.
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 2 minutes, cold shower.
2 minutes perspective shift.
Yeah. And that's carried on, thankfully. Not daily. I'll hold my hands up. But I woke up this morning, we're out late last night, and I was like, I'm groggy. It's me starting a new job today. I need to wake up. And I knew I had that tool in the toolkit. It was a great refresher for me, as I had done it before. But to bring in that consistency and to feel it every day, the boost and the energy readily available just on the other side of 2 minutes of discomfort has been, huge. I really enjoyed the process. It came at a really good time. You mentioned it at the last Todmorden event on the walk. We were just having a catch up, and I went in a very good place. So the stars aligned a bit there, and from where I was then at that conversation to coming out of the 6 weeks, it's been a big shift. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no drama. It's always, I think a lot of it was, you know, bringing people along to the reservoir in the early days, you know, where I was just doing it, you know, on a Saturday morning for people, whoever wanted to turn up. And they were coming, and I always analysed, you know, we'd do that, you know, they'd be happy, but, you know, they'd be worried about getting in the resi, and the cold water was always on the back of the mind, and they'd come back out, the breathing, and they'd be like, oh, we've got to get in the reservoir now. And, you know, I was just watching the nervous energy, you know, nervous laughter, picking up on the vibe off the people. And, you know, most people were shitting the pants to get in there, you know what I mean? And I'm like, but then to see the transformation, and sometimes it's during the process, I call it an ice smile, do you know what I mean? After about, you know, because you know yourself, like the first 30 seconds to a minute are tough, aren't they? You know, like, yeah, it's horrible. You just got to get in and do it. But after that, then, and you regulate your breath, and your body's regulated in there, and people are like, hey, I'm doing it. And there's like this smile comes about me, really. How many times have I seen that? It's just loads of times, isn't it? You know, like they have that relief and the empowerment, and, you know, in 2 minutes, you can shift your perspective. This process can be done in, you know, the whole thing can be done in 15 minutes in the morning. Do you know what I mean? But the amount of times I've seen that shift, and that's one of the questions I ask on the course, you know, on the daily. You know, on the daily, it's like, on the daily check-in, you know, I'll be saying, what story are you telling yourself before breathwork? You know, give me some words, any, you know, random words or a sentence. What are you telling yourself before breathwork? You know, a lot of the time it's grogginess, negative, can't be asked. Do you know what I mean? To push through anyway, do it. Afterwards, the words are always better. Same with the cold water. What are you telling yourself before getting that cold water today? Oh yeah, you know, I know my mind's active. My mind's coming in now. And over a 6 week period, I keep analysing your mind before you get in cold water, analysing your mind before you do breath work, doing the practice, and then writing down what you feel after it. You know, I give it you all back anyway. I give you the full thing that we've written back, so you can see it and go, shit, look at that. I remember that day, and I didn't want to do it, and look how I felt after it. And it's, you know, that's how I used to be. I'd be like, oh, I can't be arsed doing my breath work. I just do it. And there's been times that, I've woke up and, or the night before I'm going to go, right, I'm going to do breath work in the morning, I'm going to do cold water. And my alarm clock will go off. And the first thing I've said to me is, I'm not getting in that fucking cold water. First thing. Do you know what I mean? But then I have to do a deal with myself. And it's like, right, well, I'll tell you what, let's make a decision on that after we've done breath work. Like, are we doing the deal with ourselves that we'll just do the breath work then? Yeah, let's just do the breath work. Because the chimp you have to do deals with the chimp. Do you know what I mean? It's like reward it. So it's like, well, I'll tell you what, we'll part the cold water, let's do the breath work, then we'll see how we feel. Do you know what I mean? And I'll go through the breath work process. Last round, going into a retention or whatever, coming out into the meditation, I'm like, you're going to get in, don't you? Do you know what I mean? It's empowerment. And you get in, and then, procrastinate. I've got the door out onto the back. The amount of times I've been stood looking out, 6 o'clock in the morning, dark, blowing a gale. Oh, it's frozen as well. Do you know what I mean? And then you're like, oh, yeah, but I can't have no excuse now because my hammer's there. I can break the ice off. Do you know what I mean? It's one of them looking at you like, fuck, You're looking at your watch, you got to get in. Do you know what I mean? You just get in and just do it. And then afterwards, you just feel empowered, But there's been tough times, I've had some tough times in the last 12 months, personally. In regards to, losing a business, losing my only source of income. And suffering with that anxiety and that fear that can be invoked at the drop of an hat. And the first thing I did was just turn to these tools. And rather than, in years gone by, you have a low mood for weeks or months or whatever, and you're dragging your ass and you're walking around at a 2 out of 10. It's like, nip it in the bud. Get back to your practice for 2 or 3 days. Get yourself from a 2 out of 10 to a 5 to a 7 to a 9. Do you know what I mean? Over a 3 or 4 day period. And that's the difference. Some people hit a low point in their lives and that can knock them. But if you're walking around, what I say a lot to people as well is, listen, if you rate yourself out of 10 and you're a 1 or a 2 out of 10, 2 things. If I could say to you, well, in 6 weeks' time, I reckon you'd be about an 8. Would you take it? Now, if you're a 1 or a 2 out of 10 and you've been there for some time and someone said to you, you can be a 7 or an 8 out of 10, you'd take it. And it's a case of also, if you are walking around at a 2 out of 10 or a 1 out of 10 and life does throw a curveball at you, you're already down there. It's just going to flatten you. But I think these practices elevate you. So they start to elevate, it elevates you on so many different levels, but for ease of understanding, if you're walking around at a 2 out of 10 and you start to implement these practices, if I were a betting man, I bet that it's going to start to lift your numbers. So over a week, it might be up to a 3, up to a 4, and over a 6-week period, you might get to above a 6 or a 7. You know what I mean? So then when life does throw a curveball at you and you're up a 6, 7 or an 8, it might knock you a bit, but it's not going to flatten you like it would do if you're a 1 or 2 out of 10. So I believe that's what the mental resilience part is. Give yourself the best chance to lift your scores. If you think you're walking around at a 1 or a 2 out of 10, do something about it. Get yourself up to an 8 out of 10, and then life can come at you. And if it does knock you down, you can feel that. You'll feel it in yourself. You'll understand it, and then you've got the tools then to turn that back around and start to, fight against the tide and lift your scores up. That's the sort of, I try and put it across in a dead simple way so people understand, because, there's a lot of facets to breathwork, cold water. It's, and even just, saying that it's mind, body. Well, that was just mind, body we've spoke about. And then the soul level, and the spirit, the spirit or consciousness or whatever. People do get a shift in state during breathwork. They get a shift in consciousness. And some of the feedback I've had has been nothing short of profound of what people have said. They've seen or felt or, quite profound feedback has been had. So on a spiritual level as well, we start to shift people's perspectives. And I feel like there's a realization then that, hang on a minute, there's more to all this than I thought. And, there can be a realization then, maybe we're part of something bigger, part of something that's bigger than us that we don't understand, but they might have got a glimpse of during a breathwork state. You know what I mean? So yeah, there's loads of facets to it. But I think for most people in the early days, it's like, give them some understanding of the states that you might be operating in an easy, digestible way for most people to swallow without being too technical. Let them feel it. And then, half at time, you don't really need to know why you're feeling a certain way. You only need to know how to not feel a certain way by doing one thing to feel better. I think that's an easier way of looking at it than dragging loads of stuff up, you know what I mean?
So for someone who's never experienced it before, they might hear that and think, is that potentially like running away from your problems? If you've got something on your mind or something that's, been with you for many years, dragging you down, and then you do some breath work, you do some cold water just to pick you up again, that could be perceived as potentially kind of just pushing it to the side. So what is it that's different about breath work or cold water therapy that actually starts to release and help you move past these, say, traumas or certain thought patterns that people might have experienced or still be experiencing at that very point?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's undeniable, really. People have a lot of self-actualization during breathwork and cold water. I don't feel like they're running away from anything. I feel like they probably confront most things head on during it. Do you know what I mean? It can be like beautiful, enlightening, spiritual experience, or it can be quite emotional. Do you know what I mean? People can release a lot of emotion, and sometimes, they know what that emotion is for. Do you know what I mean? I say often, listen, if you start to feel emotion and release stuff, you might know. You might be thinking, Jesus, this is coming up because my goldfish died when I was 3. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, that I'm reliving that moment, or whatever traumatic moment, happened to you. It can come through that. And, they might know. But but then other times, they release and they might not know. And I just say, become the chimney, become the vent for your emotion. Because as we breathe in that life force. And I mean, what is breath? If you think about it, what is breath? It's like we can go weeks without food, unless you start putting lemons in your drink.
It's not cheating.
It's cheating. It's definitely cheating.
Not cheating.
We can go weeks without food. We can go days without water, but we can only go moments without breath. And it's the first thing we ever do when we're born, and it's the last thing we do when we die, and it's the only constant thing that's with us, and it's in tune. It's there all the time. So as we're breathing in, we can look at it as if it's like oxygen and the carbon dioxide. You can look at the scientific what they've figured out about it all, but then actually that thing energizes our cells. It's life force energy. It keeps us alive somehow. Do you know what I mean? So when we bring attention to it and we use it as a tool, it's our greatest ally.
It's the most powerful fuel we have.
Yeah. But I forgot what the question was. Have you?
I feel like you've pretty much answered it in certain ways. How do they know they're not running away from it? Just
running away.
Because breath work, cold water, you get a high from it, don't you?
Yeah, you do.
So like other, say drug use or alcohol, whatever it may be, other dopamine hits where they get the high, they're escaping from whatever it is that's making them feel low.
Yeah.
So it was, kind of just nudging you towards like what is it different about breath work, cold water?
I don't think they're escaping it. I think they're dealing with it. I think they let it out. I think they have these self-actualizations of. It's a weird one because it's a teacher as well. I've done a lot of breath work and I've had a lot of big releases during, you know, and some of the times I've understood why I was getting emotional, but then other times I haven't. But I've had this weird knowing that it needs to come out, it needs to be released, and whatever it is, what I'm getting emotional about needs to come out, and I always feel better for it afterwards. So it's a release of that energy that we've trapped. It can be stored trauma. You know, there's a belief system around that, you know, the diaphragm stores trauma. Do you know what I mean? Whenever I ask anyone, you know, in a coaching session or whatever, when they talk about negative emotion, I'm like, well, where do you feel your negative emotion? You know, I've never had anyone go, oh, it's all in my elbow. It's always here. Do you know what I mean? And even when people gasp, do you know what I mean? So there's something going on in here. Yeah. And we're using that intensively during the breath out, where we're just blasting the breath. We're hyperventilation. We're moving all that stuff. We're sucking that good life force energy in, you know, and it's rattling out any negativity we've pushed down, because we choke a lot of stuff down, don't we? You know, especially the blokes as well. You know what I mean? Our big boys don't cry. You know, even when my kids were younger, you know, like it's an instinct. God, oh, come here, don't cry. But now I'm not like that. I'm like, let that shit out, because you hold on to that and you swallow that. That's just going to stay in there somewhere and it'll come out one day, or it'll cause you, you know, they call it dis-ease within the body, which is disease, you know. So releasing that, just releasing it is a good practice to do. And when I'm describing it to the participants as well, you know, because I like to give people an heads up, because it can be quite powerful, this breathwork. And if we're out leading people into, like, because there's a fine line between giving someone an heads up of what they expect and then leading them, what I call leading them. So I wouldn't want to say, oh, you might see this or you might feel that for sure. I'm like, these are some of the things you might feel or see or whatever. But be vague, so I'm not leading them into, you know. So if they do have a big experience, I wouldn't want anyone to say, oh, it's because you said X, Y, or Z. It's like, and that's why I know that a lot of the feedback that I've had, especially the bigger moments, have been genuine, because I've never led with stuff. Like, for an example, you know, I've had quite a few people report that they've seen and communicated with loved ones who've passed away. Now, for anyone listening to this, who's like, what? Like, yeah, I'd have been like that too. I'd have called bullshit on that 5 years ago. But genuinely, they have. Do you know what I mean? People see colours and shapes and all sorts of stuff during the breathwork that, you know, are very difficult to describe what it is you're seeing. And even when you're seeing this stuff, as soon as that mind, you know, you can see colours and shapes and stuff happening when you're breathing. You can see with your eyes closed stuff happening. And it's just there. But then as soon as you sort of become aware of it and go, oh, what's that I'm seeing? It all disappears. So it just shows you, the more you can switch that cognitive thinking brain off, that chatter, and just be, that's when you're most connected to whatever it is, that stuff that people see. Do you know what I mean? But it's a powerful shift. But going back, you know, so when you start to have them experiences, get rid of the shit that you're carrying around. Do you know what I mean? It's not a case of dismissing it or running away from it. I look at, like, what I call, you know, the mainstream therapies, you know, like you've got your counseling types and people like that who, you know, had come across someone who's maybe showing negative emotion, anxiety or whatever, and they, you know, they want to rake everything up and talk about it and bring it to the forefront. And me personally, I just don't think that's beneficial. I think you get far more out of a breathwork session, personally, because it's that self-actualization. It's that breathing, rattling that emotion out. It's coming out, whether you know it or not. You're releasing that negativity from your body. You feel better for it afterwards. And you can put a name to it or put a reason to it or not. But I'll just let it go, you know what I mean? But yeah, I think dealing with it. But I always liken the release, an emotional release during breathwork, to, like, if you've ever had a loved one who's passed away, and you have that period of time where they pass to the funeral, which is normally a couple of weeks. Got that couple of weeks and you feel shitty and you're emotional and it's not a nice time. Then you have the funeral. The morning of the funeral, everyone gets upset. Everyone cries. It's the only time socially that we're all allowed to stand and cry together. Do you know what I mean? So everyone cries and they're letting the emotion out for that occasion, but they're probably letting a load of other shit out as well that's just been rammed down there. You know what I mean? Because in the society in which we live, we get told to suppress. We're suppressing emotion and we're distracted by external sources of stimulation. So, you know, we have the funeral, the service is over, the wake afterwards, there's always more of a jovial atmosphere. There's a few smiles back on people's faces. Everyone feels, you know, it's a sad day, but there's relief, and it's almost a celebration of life then at that point. You know, people bring into question their own mortality. But there's a relief of like, you know, and that's the same if you have a big experience and release during breathwork. It's painful to get that out. That's why they call it doing the work. It's painful to unshackle from this stuff that essentially, I believe, is holding us back. We rattle that out. It comes out and you've got the same releasing feeling of like, oh, I needed that. You know, that's the releasing side of things. So to answer your question, anyone who's struggling with trauma and stuff, if they did that and did show emotion, or, you know, I don't see it as running away or masking it. I see it as sort of hitting it head on and rattling it out a different way it's not in the mainstream or overly looked at. But for my personal experience and the experiences of people I've been dealing with now for the last few years, none of the other shit has worked. And then, you know, this stuff does. So it's like, you know, if the establishment of, you know, psychology and counseling and, you know, going to the doctors, getting medication, and if all that stuff worked, then there's that many people going through that service, then surely there wouldn't be as much mental health problems as there is now if all that stuff worked. So I believe it doesn't work, or it didn't work for me. It's not worked for a lot of people who are still seeking people offering the services that I'm offering because they've never got any relief or true understanding about how they operate. So
What was your experience going through what you presented with in society? As in going to the doctors, if you went to any sessions, what was your experience?
what was my experience? What when I was struggling and I went through the normal channels? Well, when I look back now, I'm like, Jesus, it's a broken system. You know, at the time it was just what you did. You know, it was before sort of the Andy's Man Club stuff came out. It weren't okay to talk then. Like, so basically, yeah, you got doctors. I remember going to doctors and I'm like, you know, I think I'm depressed, and you know, this, that, and the other, and I'm like, and they're like, oh yeah, sound, take them tablets. So I'm like, okay. So I started taking the tablets.
What were the tablets?
Citralopam. So I started taking citralopam. You know, and initially I thought I felt a bit better. You know, bit of a placebo. I'm taking tablets now, so, you know, sort of give me a wobble, as they said, you know what I mean? Started taking the tablets, I'm like, I'm still not feeling this, you know what I mean? Still not feeling it. So I went back and went, these tablets, I'm still feeling a bit shitty. And they went, oh yeah, sound, just take 2 a day then. So I'm like, okay. So I went away, started taking 2 a day, went back. I don't think these are working, these. Oh yeah, just take 3 a day. So I'm like, so I ended up taking, I think it was 4 a day. I ended up taking, got to 4 a day, and I'd done a bit of counselling as well. So yeah, I've been done a bit of counselling, but the whole thing was like sluggish as hell. Do you know what I mean? I went in there and I really presented with, look, I'm really struggling here. Do you know what I mean? Like, really struggling. Like, I don't think I want to be here anymore. Oh yeah, just take them tablets, sound. And there's this place you can go. I can't remember what it was called. I don't know if it were Mind or whatever. But like, yeah. So anyway, I phoned the number. And they went, oh yeah, you've got to email us. So I'm like, I remember thinking at the time, Jesus, I just want to speak to someone. Anyway, it was a slow process. Then they wanted to put me in a group of 10 session. So I was making my excuses not to attend that because I'm like, I don't want to sit with 10 or 12 strangers speaking about my shit. Do you know what I mean? So anyway, I managed to get onto a 1-to-1, which was all right, to be fair. Do you know what I mean? It was okay to just chat and open up. But it were form filling, and whenever you're feeling a bit negative, write it down. And very lot, for someone like me anyway, who don't like writing shit down, and if you've come across a difficult moment, there's a form that you fill in, and you through filling this form out, it gets you through this difficult moment. I'm like, that's not going to fit in with what I'm doing. Do you know what I mean? And then, so I did that on the tablets, and I say this all the time. I read a book called The Chimp Paradox, and if anyone who's listening who hasn't read that starts with all the chimp brain that I'm talking about and stuff. It's great for dissecting in simple terms how your mind works, and it was like a revelation for me, that book. I'm like, Jesus, I just got it. I'm just like, yep, I do. It tells you behaviors of what you're doing, the reasons why. And I'm like, yep. I was like 90% of the book I were doing. Do you know what I mean? All the behaviors, I was just all over it, doing it all. So I read that book. I'm like, oh, okay. You know what I mean? And then I started to get negative side effects from the medication. So anyway, at that point, I started getting negative side effects. I decided to read the leaflet that were in the tablet box. And lo and behold, some of the side effects from anti-anxiety medication, shall we call it, are suicidal thoughts, anxiety, low mood, long-term erectile dysfunction. Just read them. And I looked at that, I'm like, what the fucking hell have you given me these for? There's more side effects than there is effects. Do you know what I mean? And I also read a book. I can't remember what book's called, but this fella's like, there's no actual scientific evidence that these SRRIs or whatever they're called work. Do you know what I mean? It's all been a, sell the pills type mentality. Do you know what I mean? And if I'd have said this before COVID, people would have thought I'm mad. But after the whole COVID thing, it's like, maybe the medical establishment don't have our best interests at heart. But anyway, that's a real long podcast. But a case of, reading all the side effects, I'm like, shit, I've got to get off these. So I just said to my wife, I said, I'm not taking these anymore. And she's like, you probably need to wean yourself off them. I'm like, I'm not taking these anymore. So I stopped. And then 2 days later, I was shaking like a bloody crackhead. Sweats, palpitations, felt like I was having an heart attack. It was the most horrendous feeling I've ever felt. So I'm like, shit, I'm actually going to have to pick these. I'm addicted to something. And this is coming from a fella who's never done any recreational drugs, only ever drunk, smoked a few joints. So being addicted to the tablets that I got given to by the doctor. But I was addicted physically, so like I was getting heart palpitations, I was getting sweats, I couldn't sleep, my emotions were all over the shop. Yeah, so I had to, that were tough. But also mentally, it's like, well, but all these tablets did were numb me. They didn't fix anything, they just numbed me down, and just, it was like I was in a bloody, I was a shadow of myself, do you know what I mean? But also, is it emotionally as well? Or psychologically? One of the two. I was like, well, who am I going to be when I come off these? If my head were falling off beforehand, I've took these tablets that seem to be work. They seem to work at the time, but I realise now that they just numb me. Then I was having side effects. But then part of me was like, well, who am I going to be if I come off them? Am I going to be all right if I come off them? They were like a support crutch that I'd had for 2 years that I was like, shit, I'm like, I don't, it's like going into the abyss, and it's like, well, do I need them? Do I put up with the side effects? It was a real head messer, really. So then, but I was like, no, bollocks, I'm getting off them. Do you know what I mean? And it took me about 6 months to wean myself off them. So I can't remember the exact milligrams, but it were like, say I was taking 4 tablets, I had to take 4 tablets for a week, and then the next week I'd have to take 4 tablets one day, 3 the next, 4 the next, and just to the point, for ages until my body got used, and then I came off them, and then I'm like, can't be doing that stuff again. So yeah, that was the journey off them. And then, I'd started doing a bit of training again. Do you know what I mean? Because I'm like, well, if I'm coming off these, I need to start moving again, get the endorphins moving and, switch back to getting fit. And then, that was that, really.
And when you came off them, did that coincide with the discovery of, breath work, cold water, or did that come later down the line?
Yeah, that come later down the line. I nearly died first. So I had to have a near-death experience to start to I think that was the wake-up for me. So the timing was impeccable. And knowing what I know now about the universe and stuff, this timing was... So the situation was, wean myself off the drugs. I weaned myself off the drugs whilst simultaneously, as I was tailing off the drugs, started to do a bit of Thai boxing. So I did Thai boxing for 3 months, lost about 2 stone, got into some better shape than I've been in. And I started feeling mentally better because I was moving again. I weaned myself off the drugs. I got myself off them by, I don't know, let's say middle of March. About 4 weeks later, my appendix burst and I nearly croaked it. Do you know what I mean? So that was the realization. I'll never forget. I was in a hospital bed. I had pain. Anyone who's had appendix pain will know the pain, but I had pain in my stomach. They said that, you've got this appendix that's rumbling. And the pain was, getting increasingly worse. It was horrendous. It's the worst pain I've ever felt in my life. It's like, even if you chop your finger off now, you'd be able to hold it and go on and it start throbbing, and the pain threshold might go to 8 or 9. You'd be like, oh, and then it'd start coming back down, and you'd get a throb on, you'd be like, oh, I can manage that now. It's fucking sore, but I can manage it. This pain was like nothing else. This pain was like, it started at 9, 10, and then I'm like, I didn't think there was anything above 10. But apparently there is. It's endless. I thought this, the nurse kept coming in and going, what's your pain threshold? And I consider myself as quite a high pain threshold and not really an over, whinger, do you know what I mean? So I'm like, oh, it's a good 9 now. I'm saying it like that. I'm like, oh yeah, it's really sore, and it was fucking killing. And then it went 10, 11, 12, 13. And she's like, I'm like, I need some fucking pain relief. And she come in, she went, the only thing I've got is this thing. She said, but I have to stick it up your bum. I'm like, you stick a fucking banana up your bum. I'm not arsed, I can't have this. Do you know what I mean? There was no banana inserted, by the way. Not that I know of, anyway. They could have got right. I passed out after that, so maybe they did bring the banana out. But I remember that pain just bang, 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 increasing. It like, 1,000,001, 1,000,002. And I just never forget looking, Kelly, my wife, were in the bed at side of me, and I just looked, and it just went dark. And I just remember thinking, fuck. And that was it. And I woke up, luckily. But that realization was like, that's how finite you are. That's how quick it can happen. And I had an experience there of like, fucking hell, that could have been the last time. And you start to that was the time I started to get my shit together. That was the time I'm like, right, shit needs to change. And it was great. That was the start of the journey for me. That was the start of like, okay. And it took me fucking ages. It was a great weight loss program. Do you know what I mean? I'd lost about 2 stone training beforehand, and then I lost fucking 3 stone in a week being in hospital. Do you know what I mean? That were mad. But that was the time then from beginning of 2018 when that happened. I'm like, right, I cleared a lot of shit out. I'm alive, both internally, externally. And it was like, there's a different way to be. Do you know what I mean? And I just took that then of like, well, you know, you there's a saying, but I can't remember it. I'll probably butcher it, but it's something like, your life only begins when you realise you've only got one, or something like that. You know what I mean? Whereas like you just bumble through life and I think I'll be here till I'm 80. But then when something like that happens, it just gives you a right jolt of like, fucking hell, it can be any time. It'll take you. Do you know what I mean? So then from that, that was like I'd hit rock bottom. I'd crawled out the pit a little bit, but then that happened. And like I said, I got off the drugs, I trained, and then that happened. And I always think like, what if I weren't off them? And what if I hadn't trained? Would I have survived? Was that like a 3 or 4 month period of like, the universe going, we're gonna throw a shit butty at you soon, so get moving, son, because you're gonna need your energy.
Make sure it don't stick.
Yeah. So then that were that, and then from that point on, then move forward, and just try to do better, self-help, self-learning, into, and then COVID was a big thing, another thing of, I think it touched a lot of people that have like, fucking hell, we don't have to work 7 and 8 days a week. Do you know what I mean? There's more things to be doing in life. I think that was a big realization for a lot of people. It was for me as well, on 2 levels, one, realizing that, the world doesn't end if everyone only works 3 days a week, which would be far better than us all working 6. Do you know what I mean? And the other one was justification, because I've, long believed that the powers that be don't have our best interests at heart. So that proved a lot of stuff to me. And then, I started becoming more mindful. And I actually learnt breathwork through going to different sorts of ceremonies and, moving in different circles and, just going seeking out different things that weren't mainstream or didn't revolve around standing around the TV drinking pints or going down the pub. Do you know what I mean? I just got out of my own way and just thought, I need to understand what's going on with myself, because I don't want to feel this anymore. And I've got young children and stuff, and there's other people about, and I'm like, I don't believe anyone should suffer. I've always walked through life thinking, there's got to be more to life. There's got to be more to life than being born, going to school, going to work, retiring if you're lucky, and then dying. I've always thought there's got to be more to life than that. And I think that were a lot of my struggles as well. Do you know what I mean? I've walked through life. I'm like, I don't get this. I don't get this game that we're playing, because it's not it's not one that I'm enjoying. And, sort of had them realizations, especially with that. And then after that, it's like, right, learn some stuff, do better. And then when I found the breath and the cold water and, how it helped me and how it's a tool and it's easy to do. You can do it anywhere. If you haven't got the cold, you can still do the breath. You can do it in the car. You can do it while you're talking to someone. You can, and when I had that realization, how much it helps me, and I did it for years, I did it for myself a lot, in a lot of different environments with lots of different people, on my own, every day, through running stressful businesses and, having a hectic life. And it was the only thing that ever brought me any sort of comfort and peace. And I did it a lot. And then I'm like, other people should know about this.
What was your first exposure to breathwork?
My first exposure to breathwork,
when it first dropped in, as a almost, you realized it was a thing, and then your first experience with that.
Well, I first remember doing it in. Can we talk about medicine?
Of course we can.
So I first did breathwork. I'll tell you my first ever experience of breathwork. I thought, what a strange experience this is. Yeah, because we were doing breathwork just before a medicine ceremony. And for anyone who doesn't know what medicine is, this one was a ayahuasca ceremony. So I'm the guy who's never done anything, about to drink ayahuasca, and thought the breathwork was strange and weird and hippie.
And you're about to drink ayahuasca.
And I'm about to drink ayahuasca. So needless to say, I'm sat there doing this breathwork. And it was only simple, box breathing. Simple box breathing breathwork. And I'm sat there and thinking, oh, now if my mates could see me in here now doing this, little did I know what were to come. Do you know what I mean? That was my first experience of breathwork, going, this is a lot of shite. Just bring the ayahuasca out, will you? That was sort of my mind process. That's where I was at. So that was my first experience of it. So like, it weren't the most profound experience. And I think I never really got into it then. But then I think the second one was, I think the first time I ever had a big experience from breathwork, I'm like, jeepers, this is powerful, was in the Mallorca with Jackie. And we did some breathing there. And it was like, the constant one that you do. And then the toning and the release. So, I'd done a few things and been in a few different ceremonial settings. So I was more able to relax. And we just did this constant breathing. It's like that sort of for ages. And it just took me somewhere, like similar to the sort of psychedelic type experiences that I'd had. And I'm just like, I just remember thinking, this can't be real, just breathing like this. And I felt like I was floating. I would see all the different colours. I ended up releasing some emotion as well. And this was before this was like sort of just an introduction, and we're just doing this breath work, and it was just like, jeez, no way. And I remember coming back down, did some toning, coming back in, and I remember saying, like, how long were we doing that for? Like 10 minutes. She's like, oh no, that was like nearly an hour. And it's like, God, that's mad. That's mad. And then I did, so then I knew the power of breath. So then I started seeking it out. And that's when I come across like, I can't remember who told me about that now. Anyway, I come across Wim Hof, his breathing. And I started doing that. There's some videos on YouTube, like an 11-minute video on YouTube, just Wim Hof breathing. And I started doing that. And again, I remember I used to go up to my bed. I'd come home from work, go up to my bedroom, and, it was a stressful job. I was running my own business, and, I was probably doing the work of, realistically, 4 people, really. I should have had about 4 staff with what I was doing, and I was doing it all on my own. So it was like horrendously stressful. Constant in that fight or flight mode, constantly blocked head and stuff like that. And, I get home and I bring that energy into the house. But beforehand, when I was doing it, before I was aware of energetic exchanges and stuff, I was bringing energy into the house, and it was sort of probably being felt. My mood was probably being felt in the house, which, looking back now, I'm like, Jesus, do you know what I mean? But when I became aware of that, I'd come in and I'd like, hi, just give me 10 minutes. And I'd just go upstairs, do this 10-minute Wim Hof breathing video before I had a shower. Sit on the floor outside at bed, do it, headphones in, just do it every night. Have a shower, come back down, it'd just be gone. All that shit from the day would be gone. And I could just be present with my family. I could engage in conversations without thinking about what I've should be doing tomorrow, or what I did do today. And, you know, and I'm like, Jesus, this just started sort of levering the gap in my psyche of like, there's something to this shit, you know. Do you know what I mean? And I remember just doing that every night. But then I was seeking out like longer versions, and then I started to, you know, just find the music and do my own stuff. And then I had some big experiences myself, you know. And then obviously, and then I'm like, oh, he does this cold water. And even me, I'm like, ooh, don't fancy that cold water, you know, like that. And he's like, oh, have a cold shower. So, you know, I remember like, Jesus Christ, the first time I had a cold shower, I felt like I was going to die. You know what I mean? I turned it to full cold. I'm like, oh shit, no, can't do that. And it took me 2 weeks to get from lukewarm to full cold for 30 seconds. And then I built it up to 2 minutes. And I remember speaking to you, because you were doing the cold water, weren't you? You were doing all that. And I spoke to Louis, and I'm like, I think I might want to do this cold water, you know. And he's like, yeah, sound. I'm like,
Wasn't it whilst we're in Scotland?
it was. We were out on the bike trip in Scotland. Best boat. Loch Lomond on a bike trip, your first cold water. I mean, that's mega. But I remember it with you and Nat, in the, and yeah, it was just like, yeah, come on. So I'm like, fucking hell. Do you know what I mean? And I remember like thinking, gee, this is so against everything that we've ever been told or whatever. And I'm just like, oh, right, just do it. And, you know, perfect fellas to do it with, you know what I mean? So I was like, right, let's get in and do it. And I did it and got out. I'm like, holy fuck, this is mega. Do you know what I mean? This is just lit. This is lit a fire under my ass now. Do you know what I mean? And we did we did some breath work first. We did some breath work straight into that. Bam, out. I'm like, yes, that's mega. And then then. I did it once in Loch Lomond. And then I did it in, the next time I did that was up at Snailsden with you again. And again, that had been a couple of months. And I'm like, let's go and do that again. So we went and did it again. And it was mega. Just all the energy moving through your body and everything. So yeah, and then that was the process then of like starting to implement that into a daily routine. Do you know what I mean? So I feel like I've gone off on a tangent there, but
No, you haven't.
yeah, so that's that. So that's when I started to incorporate it into my routine. Do you know what I mean? That's when I started to understand, you know, because going back to what you know, with the medication and the forms that you fill in and the approach of counselling and stuff, you know. And if some people get benefit from that, then that's fine. And I'd argue that I did get some benefit from talking to someone, to be fair. Do you know what I mean?
It's a good start for a lot of people.
It definitely is. Yeah. It definitely is. And I think, you know, speaking to the lady I spoke to, I had 6 sessions and, you know, she brought about some realizations for me. So it's definitely a good, you know, speaking to anyone is good. It's, you know, it's good.
Who's prepared to listen.
Yeah, who's prepared to listen. Yeah, just get it off your chest. And that's a great point, because I remember when I was struggling, and, you know, do this sort of, when it was just before, because Andy's Man Club came out like halfway between, from my memory. And I remember telling a few people who I know, do you know what I mean? I said, listen, you know, this is where I'm at and this is what I'm doing at the minute, you know, with medication and all that. And they're like, they were so shocked, because I used to wear a great mask. Do you know what I mean? I'd be down in the pits of despair. I'd be feeling terrible. Do you know what I mean? And then, like, you know, even let's just say we were going to a party or something, you know, and I'd be feeling shit and not feeling it. I'm like, fucking hell, you know, don't even want to go outside, don't want to see anyone. And, you know, you're in the taxi, you're on the way there, and you go and you walk through there and you're like, hey, poof, mask goes on. Do you know what I mean? And you don't let anybody know. But that's tiring. Do you know what I mean? Because then when you come out of that situation, you come back and you're back on your own, you're like, oh, straight back into that. And then, you know, go to work every day, you know, a customer comes in, hey, and then boom, and you're just like up and just hitting the bloody floor. But then that affects the people around you then, because, you know, how come you can become the life of the soul, but you can't be that like that all the time, you know what I mean? But when you come back home and you're in your house, that's your safe zone. So that's when you crash. But then you're crashing in front of the people who you're, who you love and you're doing everything for, so it's yeah, but none of my, a lot of people who I knew at the time didn't know, and I said to a few people, I've been really struggling and stuff, and some of kind words were offered, but it was quite evident to me that they didn't know what to do with that information. They didn't know what to say. They didn't know how to approach it. It's a bit like, okay, now, and it got glossed over a little bit. And, I felt a bit of a dick for saying something then. And then I also felt a bit alone, I mean, the stigma's been removed a lot since then from around it. But yeah, speaking to the right people who are willing to listen is good. I always found it good being in circles of people who I didn't really know, because I could just say whatever, and it weren't, without fear of upsetting someone or without fear of burdening someone else with my problems. It was just in a space where I could speak, and everyone was speaking in that space. And that's what I offer at the beginning of my sessions, and that's what we do as well, innit? I always give people the opportunity to speak and speak the truth, and sometimes that's daunting to people if they come along to a session and, they feel like they have to speak. But I always give them the out. You don't have to say an out, just say your name. But giving the people the chance to speak, they start to unravel things, maybe for themselves. They make it real with words. They start to put that internal dialogue into out there. Do you know what I mean? And they're like, Jesus. And, some people didn't even know what they were going to say until it was their time to share. And they just... it just comes out, and I think it's powerful, but it's I understand for a lot of people it's a bit strange and weird to be saying shit, but I think I try and create a safe environment. I explain what it means to speak your truth and talk freely without judgment. It's quite liberating. It's difficult to do, but it's that comfort zone thing again. But when you pass the other side of that, a lot of people get relief from it. And it's great power as well, because we sort of go around the room and everyone has a chance to say the piece. They can just say the name and their intention for being there. They can say what they really want for 1 second or 5 minutes or however long they want. But what I always see is it's a great exercise, because as you go around, I'll always share I'll always give an example of sharing. I'm not, in no way am I ashamed of the journey I've been on, and if I can share my story to help someone else, then so be it. I'll lay myself vulnerable to save anybody. So, but it's always powerful to go around the circle and listen to people speak. Because you've got, I'll share my bit of my story or whatever, to encourage people, it's okay, and create that space. But you'll go around and someone will be suffering with anxiety, someone else will be suffering with overthinking, someone else will be suffering with this. Then you might get someone who's like, I'm in a real good place and, everything's good and great. Do you know what I mean? Because I also said, look, you don't all have to be doom and gloom if you're in a good place. Sound. I've had a lot of people feedback to me that, we had 2 happy people say something, and then I didn't want to bring the tone down. It's like it just shows you the balance of life. But also, as we go round and people get to speak, and it comes back in, it's like we're not all that different, are we? Do you know what I mean? And if someone's got the strength to share and speak their truth at one side of the circle, it may help someone at the other side who hasn't got that strength, but they know that they're not alone. If someone's going, yeah, I've got real bad anxiety, and I wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, I've got that dread feeling in my stomach. It's like a washing machine inside. I don't feel like I can face the day. I'm hanging on by a thread. If they're saying that, someone else in that circle might be feeling the exact same thing, but they might feel like it's only them in the world who feels like that. Do you know what I mean? But the fact that someone else has said it, even just that realization of I'm not on my own. I'm not the only one. I'm not mad. Because I thought I was mad. This internal dialogue, this anger I used to get, the angry outbursts, I thought I was mad. If I told someone I've got some of the thoughts that I have and the internal dialogue, I get white coats would come for me. Do you know what I mean? But there were I tell you what, there were one fella who I seen and did a little bit of. He was like he did a bit of NLP, and he actually broke a lot of stuff down for me in a way that I could understand, just in a normal, normal language speak. And them sessions really sort of resonated with me because he was saying a lot of stuff. He could almost say what I was thinking, and obviously he's just reading into what I was doing. But yeah, it was it's powerful knowing that the stuff that goes on up top, it's not as strange as you think once you start to give people an understanding of what's going on top and how to manipulate that. Then this is the thing with the breath work, dread in the morning, overwhelm, negative emotion, all these things, you can know why they're happening or not, but know that they all come from that chimp fight or flight state. And the conduit to get yourself from that state to a calm state is the breath. And that's what I put across. And you don't need to know the reason why you're feeling negative, or you might. But nevertheless, I guarantee you're going to do a few rounds of breath, you'll feel a little bit different than you did before it.
As a closing question, with Awen being to inspire, to be inspired.
Oh, yeah.
What's been your biggest inspiration on this journey from where you were at the lowest to where you are today?
What's been the biggest inspiration? I don't think there's been one. Do you know what I mean? I think there's been a number of micro inspirations. Do you know what I mean? The different people I've met. Do you know what I mean? Different circles I've moved in. Different things that I've done. I think I draw my inspiration from that. Like, could draw inspiration from Louis. He guided me in my first cold water session. And give me the same that I try to give to other people of it's all right and this is how you do it, and it's just normal speak. Nothing too over the top. Some good solid guidance. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, Louis got me into the cold water. So I draw inspiration from you, man. Obviously, the breath work, the Wim Hof breathing. I've evolved my own breathwork practices into my own practice, so it's it's loosely based on that sort of thing, but it's my own vibe now. Do you know what I mean? And I've got my own teachings from it, and I pass my own learnings on through doing the practice. Do you know what I mean? I did the practice myself, got all my teachings, and then went and sat with Wim Hof and learn a lot of the nuts and bolts of it, if you will. The scientific studies and stuff. I didn't need any scientific studies, but it's handy knowing that stuff as well. So that's inspiration. I think the biggest one, I don't know if it's an inspiration or a drive, it's to help as many people realize that they don't have to suffer. There's always something that can be done, and it normally comes from understanding yourself. And it's a drive to help other people. You shouldn't have to get to 40 or 35 to start to check in with yourself and realize there's more to life or whatever. You shouldn't have to get to the point where your head's falling off before you realize that you need to do something. So it's more of a drive to pass on the teachings, pass on what I've learned, pass on what I've learned from other people, surrounding yourself with good people, surrounding yourself with people who are like-minded, who support you in your endeavours. But then there's a drive to sort of change the direction of, might sound bold this, but humanity. Do you know what I mean? We are the pioneers, man. It's like, if we don't do it, who's going to do it? We're at a precipice of time where, you know, potentially in our lifetimes, we're going to have to be the people who stand up for human consciousness with the rise of everything that's going on in the world. I mean, Jesus, you only have to look outside to realize what an absolute fucking mess it is. Do you know what I mean? Turn on the news, it's like it's like some out of Hunger Games happening at the minute, you know? You've got the rise of AI, you've got madness going on, you've got people trying to stop wars and other people wanting to continue it. It's like bonkers. But you know, people who are on this tip, you know, like us lot with the, you know, Cold Water Tribe, Men of Awen, you know, me with Odyssey, it's like we're all trying to raise the vibration of our fellow men and women, you know, and at the minute we're doing it, you know, 1 and 2 at a time and bringing about realizations. But even since 2020, there's been a massive shift in consciousness. You know, there's been a massive uptake in mindfulness and mental health awareness and stuff. But we are the pioneers. You know, we've come, you know, I've come to the conclusion that anything I've ever been told or taught that's come down from the powers that be, I bring into question. I'm just having to take the perspective with my own senses, because anything we've ever been taught or told has come essentially from the people who locked us up and suppressed us, and they continue to try and suppress us and keep us in a fear state. And I think the more people like us who, you know, remove that fear from people and empower and enlift people, I think, you know, at first it's going to be a trickle, and then it's going to be a flow, and then it's going to, you know, there's going to be a point in which, you know, we get the opportunity to stand up for what's right. And I think, you know, building as many strong human beings as we can, you know, if you're emotionally regulated and mentally resilient as a human being, you know, when shit comes down the pipe, it's not going to flatten you. It's going to knock you from an 8 or 9 out of 10 down to even if it knocks you down to a 2, it's not flattened you, and you've got the tools to get back up. And I think building that going forward for as many people as we can get in contact with is all power to keeping things moving in an enlightened direction, I would have thought.
Nice. So how do people get in touch, find out more, or get on this 6-week program?
Yeah, well, I've got social media pages. So I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, I've got a website, so they can reach out direct. I've got
What's it called?
Odyssey Mind. Odyssey Mind on Instagram, Odyssey Mind on Facebook, odysseymind.co.uk, and just ping me a message, reach out. Do you know what I mean? It's a friendly chat, you know, to get in there and just let's see what you're about, bring you on board and show you some stuff.
Beautiful.
Awen.
Awen.
Awen.